Some of these tips could literally save your drone. Here are the 12 biggest drone mistakes new pilots make with the DJI Mini 3 Pro. Let's jump right in. As a beginner, over time, you learn the mistakes that can jeopardize your drone. This might be settings you didn't know about, such as emergency shut-off, flying your drone in ways you didn't know were risky, or trying something too advanced as a beginner. Well, this video should save you from having to learn those mistakes the hard way by potentially losing or damaging your drone. Let's take a look at the 12 biggest mistakes new pilots make with the DJI Mini 3 Pro. Let's jump right in and start with mistake number 1. Now, I just want to say a big thanks to Wirestock for sponsoring this video, the go-to platform for creatives to sell videos and photos. I'll talk more about Wirestock and their platform later in this video. Not holding the left joystick up long enough when hand launching. So the general advice when it comes to beginners and hand launching your drone is that you shouldn't do it. But in my opinion, it makes sense to hand launch your drone in some scenarios. For example, you might just have nowhere on the ground to be able to put your drone down. It might be a really rocky area, or you might be at the beach where it's really sandy. I'll get onto that in more detail later in this video, but some scenarios it just makes sense to hand launch your drone. So the way you do this is you push the 2 joysticks downwards and inwards on the controller, which will start the propeller spinning, and then you hold up on the left joystick. But this has happened to me a few times where I've held up on the left joystick, I felt the drone start to lift off my hand, and the minute I feel like it's in the air, I let go completely off the stick. The drone hasn't actually got itself into a hover yet, and the minute I let go of that left stick, it just drops out of the sky. So this has happened to me once or twice. Luckily, it was in an area that had lots of tall grass and the drone was completely fine. But the drone, once I let off that left stick, even though I think it's hovering in there, it just drops out of the sky. So that's something you really should be aware of. Whenever it comes to hand launching your drone, make sure you hold up in the left stick until the drone takes off of your hand and gets away up into the air. Don't let off the stick just because you think the drone is now hovering. Let it take off completely from your hand and go up into the air before you let off that left stick. That way you won't end up in a scenario where it might just drop out of your hand or just drop out of the sky where you've just let go of it. Taking off from something that isn't perfectly flat. So this is something that's happened to me with this drone and other drones such as the Mavic 3, and something that you should watch out for. If you put your drone down in something that's perfectly flat and take it off, everything will be fine. But there's sometimes I've been out flying where I've put the drone down on something that isn't really that perfectly flat. For example, a large boulder at the beach. And when you put the drone down, it's sitting slightly at an angle. I also put it on top of a big, large post once, where the drone was sitting at an angle like this. And you just presume that when you press up, the drone will take off completely fine. But what can happen is, if the drone starts to take off, if the propellers start to spin, and the drone slides, it sometimes thinks that it's flipping over, and it will automatically cut the propellers. So this is, again, like I said, something that's happened to me before. The drone starts to take off, and then it thinks it's sliding. You get a message on the screen to say that the drone has flipped over, and the propellers will completely cut out. Now, the drone hasn't actually flipped over. It just doesn't seem to understand why it's tilting during takeoff. The propellers cut out and it will drop. The times this has happened to me, it's actually slid down that rock. Luckily, I caught it as it was sliding. And again, when I put it on top of the big post, it started to slide and I seen it sliding and I caught it before it slipped off the post. So that's something I learned from as a beginner. Try whenever you're taking your drone off to put it on something that's very flat and it's not going to slide when the propellers start to spin. Don't fly the drone when it's very windy. Now, I know you see lots of videos online at the minute where people are testing the wind resistance of the DJI Mini 3 Pro in wind speeds that far exceed its capabilities, which is 8.5 to 10 meters per second. And the reality is the drone is extremely capable in them high wind speeds, but it's my advice, especially as a beginner, to not go out flying when it's super windy. The risk is not that the drone is going to flip over in the air, because chances are it's not. The risk is that you get a gust of wind that blows into an obstacle near it, such as a cliff. An example I had of this recently was I was out during a windy day and I was recording footage for a previous video testing the obstacle avoidance of the DJI Mini 3 Pro. I was flying it towards a rock formation and checking that it would brake when it got close to that rock formation, which it did. But then while it was close to them rocks, there was a large gust of wind and it blew the drone straight towards the rocks. Now, thankfully, the obstacle avoidance systems kicked in and the drone actually flew itself up the side of the rocks and over the top of it, saving itself. But that happened long before I had a chance to react. And this video just shows you how a gust of wind can very quickly blow your drone towards an obstacle. So this is something you want to avoid as a beginner. So if it is an extremely windy day, I know it's disappointing sometimes, you want to go out flying, the sun's out, and it's maybe been windy for a few days, you're desperate to fly your drone and you just think, okay, I'll just go out and I'll risk it. It's not really worth it in my opinion. And the other thing is, if it's extremely windy, you're not going to get the smoothest off footage either. So you're better just waiting until the wind is calmer. Now there's a few apps I recommend to check the wind speed, such as XC Weather, Drone Buddy, UAV Forecast. These are all great apps that you can use to check the wind speed and make sure that it is safe for going out flying with your drone. Holding the joysticks in the emergency shut-off position. Did you know that if you hold your joysticks in a certain position, the propellers will just stop on the drone and it could possibly fall out of the sky? This is the emergency propeller stop functionality, and it's in the DJI Fly app under advanced safety settings. The emergency propeller stop can be set to happen in emergencies only or any time. And what that means is if you hold the joysticks downwards and inwards or downwards and outwards, and admittedly that is a strange position to be holding your joysticks when flying your drone, but it is possible to hold them in that position. The propellers will just stop and your drone can possibly fall out of the sky. Now this feature is if, for example, you fly your drone into a tree and the propellers keep spinning, that you can shut them off in the emergency to make it safe to go up and recover your drone. But this is something you want to be aware of and check what the settings are set to so that you don't accidentally hold the joysticks in that position and cut the propellers off in midair. And when you know what happens when the propellers cut off in midair with a drone, it's not going to end well. So this is a feature you want to get your head around and fully understand, just to make sure that it's set right and that you don't accidentally trigger it in a non-emergency scenario. Losing the controller sticks. Now this one might seem trivial, but the sticks on the new RC controller have an extremely narrow base. They are fantastic to use, really nice and responsive, but a little bit fiddly whenever you're screwing them on. And it's happened to me a few times where I think I've got the stick on the peg, I start to turn it, it slips out of my hand and it falls into the grass. And these are so small that if it falls into tall grass or any overgrown ground, you're going to struggle to find this. There's a few times I've dropped one of these joysticks and it's taken me 10-15 minutes to go around and find it. So my recommendation would either be to be extremely careful whenever you're putting them on, make sure it's seated on the base of the controller before you start screwing the stick in, or maybe just pick up a spare pair of them, because I think it's inevitable at some point if you fly a lot that you're going to lose one of these. Now I just want to quickly talk about today's video sponsor, which is Wirestock. They help creators and drone pilots like you sell photos and videos online easily. The benefits of Wirestock are that they distribute your videos and photos to all major marketplaces from a single account. You can submit your videos and photos in seconds, you just upload your content and they take care of the rest. They offer high royalty rates and discoverability, which is important as you want people to find your content. You can build a beautiful portfolio and share and showcase your content through that portfolio while selling on all the largest marketplaces. All payments are also sent to one single account and trackable on a single dashboard. In terms of fees, Wirestock's commission is 15% off paid royalties. They only make money when you do. It's a great platform if you're looking to start making a little bit of side income selling some of the content you are creating with your drone. So a big thanks to Wirestock for sponsoring this video. If you want to check out their platform, I've put a link in the description down below. Not updating the home point when active tracking. So this is something that's second nature to someone who active tracks a lot with drones which have had active tracking for a while, such as the Mavic 3. But if you've been flying a Mini 2 and you've just upgraded to a Mini 3 Pro and you're using active track for the first couple of times, something you want to be aware of is that whenever you take the drone off, the home point is set. Now, no matter where you then go to, the drone will always go back to where it took off from. So this is important. If, for example, you're tracking yourself walking along a path and you've allowed the drone to active track you for a while, and you want the drone to return to home, you might think by pressing that return to home button that the drone is going to come back to where you're standing now. But the reality is it's going to go back to where it took off from. So what you want to do periodically is in the DJI Fly app settings, as you move along, go in and you can press update home point, and that is going to update the home point to where you're at now. That means the drone will come back to where you're now standing. So as you walk along and allow the drone to active track you, make sure every now and then that you update the home point so that the drone will always come back to where you have now moved to. This is even more important if you're somewhere where you have moved and the gap between is no longer a safe place for the drone to land. For example, if you're on a boat. If you're on a boat and you take off from where the boat originally is, moved along in that boat, and you hit return to home, the drone could go back and land in the water. So make sure to be updating your home point as you active track yourself. Flying sideways on-sighted. So the obstacle avoidance systems on the DJI Mini 3 Pro are absolutely fantastic. I've been testing them out in brake mode and bypass mode, which is where it can fly around obstacles itself. And it's absolutely fantastic, but you have to remember it's tri-directional. So you have sensors to the front, sensors to the back, and sensors downward. This means it has no sensors to the side. So if you're flying your drone sideways, it will not see any obstacles coming to its side. It will just simply hit them. So to avoid this, make sure you're always keeping your eye on the drone as well as the screen to make sure that you're not going to fly sideways into obstacles such as trees. And this becomes more important if you're doing active tracking. So the two modes to watch out for in active track are parallel mode, where the drone is off to your side and it will be flying sideways as it tracks you. So make sure that the coast is clear and it is not going to have any obstacles in its path. The other mode is point of interest. This is where the drone will automatically orbit around you or whatever it's tracking. And as it orbits, it is flying sideways. So you want to make sure, again, there's no trees or no obstacles that the drone could orbit into and crash into them, because it's not going to see it because it doesn't have sideways obstacle avoidance sensors. It's fine in trace mode because it will normally see in front of it. Trace mode is where it follows behind you. So that is a mode that is generally very safe. But parallel mode, point of interest mode, or even if you're flying it sideways manually, just make sure to be keeping an eye on the drone, keeping an eye on what's coming up in front of it to make sure that you don't accidentally fly your drone sideways into a tree. Turning off obstacle avoidance. Now, as a beginner, I highly recommend you never fly in this mode. There are reasons you would fly in this mode. For example, I was recently flying this drone through an archway, and every time I got close to the archway, it would brake itself or it would fly out around the arch because it was either in brake or bypass mode. But I wanted to fly it through the center of the arch, so I turned it off. I turned the obstacle avoidance off so I could fly through the center of that arch. But this is really quite advanced, something I highly recommend you don't do as a beginner, because as mentioned, if you turn off the obstacle avoidance, the drone will not stop itself from flying into an obstacle. So if you want to fly in the safest way possible, which is recommended as a beginner, and have the most safety systems turned on in the drone to prevent scenarios such as crashing into an obstacle, then I highly recommend that you do not turn off obstacle avoidance. Relying on obstacle avoidance over water. So this is something that I've been reminded of recently. This is true for a lot of drones, not just the DJI Mini 3 Pro, but the downward obstacle avoidance works fantastic over solid land. But when it comes to flying over water, it can be a little more hit or miss, and there's a few things you want to watch out for. So if you're getting really low over water, it's important that you don't just rely on the downward obstacle avoidance sensors. You want to visually see how low the drone is over the water to keep an eye on it. It's a little bit hit or miss. Sometimes it thinks it's either higher above the water than it is, or it's closer to the water than it actually is. The more important things to watch out for are waves. If you're really low over the water, really low over the sea, you could get caught out if you're just relying on the downward obstacle avoidance sensors and the forward facing camera of a wave coming up behind the drone. And if that wave is big enough, it will just engulf your drone. The other thing to watch out for is sea spray. As the water kicks around, if it hits rocks, if you're flying near rocks over the water, you can get scenarios where the water will hit the rock and kick up, and if you're near it, can go over the drone. So if you're flying over water, my recommendation, I do a lot of flying over water, my recommendation is that you visually keep an eye on the drone. Don't really rely on the downward sensors. Yes, they're great, but your eyes better, and just make sure that you can visually see that the drone is high enough over the water, make sure the waves are clearing it, and make sure you're nowhere near where you're going to get a lot of kick up or spray. And if you are, just make sure you're back enough, far enough away from it. Another little top tip I'll just throw in quickly to help you get better looking video from your drone if you're flying over water, smoother video. This goes for all drones, not just the DJI Mini 3, any drone with downward obstacle avoidance sensors. I find that if you fly close to the water, the drone can do this. It seems to think sometimes it's lower or closer to the water than it is, and what you'll find is you get footage when you look back where the drone is bobbing up and down like this, and it doesn't look very cinematic. The way to fix this is to just raise the drone slightly higher so that the obstacle avoidance doesn't keep kicking in and it doesn't keep raising itself and lowering itself. And then if you're that little bit higher and that's not happening, you'll get much smoother footage. So that's just a little top tip if you want smoother footage when flying over water. Don't land or take off from sand. So you may have seen a lot of my videos recently where I am taking or landing this drone off from the beach where it's sandy. This is something I do quite a lot. I know a lot of people don't like it. They're worried about the sand blowing into the motors, but something I always do when I bring the drone home is I get the hoover and I hoover out that area and around the motors. I don't find I normally get sand in there anyway, so this has never been an issue with any drone before. But something I have noticed with the DJI Mini 3 Pro is there are two large vents in the bottom which go into the battery compartment. Now there is two standoffs in the bottom of the drone, so when you put it down on the ground, it is raised up off the sand, but there has been a few scenarios where I've pulled the battery out and there has been some sand has got in through them vents. So for the DJI Mini 3 Pro specifically, I recommend you don't put it down anywhere where it's sandy, because there is that risk that the sand gets blown into them vents. It's not really a big deal if it does, I guess. I've again found that I just turn it up and the sand will come out, and I even try and get the hoover bristles in and hoover out and it's fine, but it's something I've stopped doing just because I find that sand kind of going in through them vents. The way around this is either hand launch it, again be careful if you do that, but this is one of them scenarios where I think it makes sense to do that. Take it off from an area that's raised up off the sand, or you can buy the landing pads which you can put down to keep the sand off the drone. Don't fly near birds, they will attack the drone, and even more importantly, it's really unfair on the birds themselves. Admittedly, this is something I've been reminded of recently. It's something I found out very quickly as a beginner flying older drones. I fly a lot of coastal areas around Northern Ireland, and I found out very quickly that birds really do not like the drones, and they get upset whenever you fly drones near them, not even near them, in close proximity to them. The couple of things that I found would happen where you would take the drone off and you would hear the birds start to get upset, so I would always try and land it in them scenarios. Or you would put the drone in the air and all of a sudden a bird would come out of nowhere and either flash in front of the camera or even attack the drone. And this is something that I found out recently again with the Mini 3 Pro, because I've been out capturing a lot of coastal scenes. There were one or two times flying this drone where again I would have a bird just flash right in front of the camera really close, or the bird, you could see it start to circle around the drone and try to go in and attack it. So the last thing you want is to lose a drone because a bird has attacked it, but even more importantly, the last thing you want is to go out and be upsetting birds. So there are a few websites you can check out online which will show you where birds are generally nesting. You want to avoid them areas. But also my recommendations are, if you take the drone off and you hear birds in the distance start to make noise and get upset, just land it and move somewhere else. Try to fly it much further away from them. And if you see birds starting to get close to your drone, land it immediately, because they are prone to attacking the drone. You don't want to lose the drone, you don't want to hurt a bird. Save your drone, don't annoy the birds, don't fly near birds is my recommendation. And lastly, be careful of drone props spinning in the wind. This has happened to me twice recently because it's just been so windy in Northern Ireland at the minute. If it's extremely windy and you're carrying your drone like this or into the wind, the propellers can actually start spinning themselves in the wind. That might seem trivial, but what can happen is then, if you're holding it like this and your finger's anywhere near it, the propellers are spinning quite fast and you end up clipping a finger. If it's cold, it's quite sore, or you can actually damage the trailing edge off the propellers itself. So if it's really windy, try not to hold the drone like this. Try not to hold it into the wind so that the propellers don't spin up. You don't want to damage your prop, you don't want to damage your finger. Or just wait until the last minute to unfold the legs, carry it with the legs folded up, and that way you won't have any risk of the propeller spinning and, like I say, either damaging the propeller or damaging your fingers. That might seem trivial, but trust me, if you let the propeller spin up in the wind and let it clip one of your fingers, you'll be reminded of that point and reminded of why you should carry the drone folded up. So hopefully now you know all the mistakes that you should avoid as a beginner pilot to make sure that you don't damage or lose your drone, specifically your DJI Mini 3 Pro. Are there any mistakes that I've missed that you think other pilots should know about? Please let me know and let them know by posting it in the comments down below. If you've liked this video and you've learned something new, please let me know by giving me the thumbs up and clicking that like button down below. And if you're a new pilot or you want to learn how to get better photos and more cinematic videos with your drone, then I recommend you check out my channel where I have a ton of other content to help you level up your drone game. If you want to stick around and watch a few more of them now, here's a few I personally recommend. I'll not keep you back any further. Thank you so much for watching. I'll catch you over there.